Our story begins in the cold vacuum of space, where Six-Shot is being trailed by Cosmos. Both have been, well, one has been chasing the other for quite some time, and now their chase may have come to an end. However, inside of Cosmos's cockpit are two other Autobots, Override and her apprentice, Hotshot, both from the Cybertronian Elite Guard, along with their companion Cosmos. They've actually been tracking Six Shot for a long time, hoping that he would pay for the worlds that he scorched under Megatron's orders. And Hotshot simply notices something. And two other ships duking it out. And he simply says, "Commander," or "Ma'am, we have two other unidentified bogies in our radius." To which Override looks over, and she actually sees the spaceship does have a Wrecker insignia. And she states, who could that be? To which she then has Cosmos patch into the communications. And she says, "This is Commander Override of the Autobot Elite Guard. Identify yourself immediately or we will open fire." However, this is where a voice simply states, "Wow, so that's how you treat your old friends, huh, Override?" Into which she says, "Wait a minute, Wheeljack? Yep, nice to know you guys are still alive and out there. But right now, he's got a score to settle with this Decepticon." And pretty much explains that he's been following Dreadwing. And to which he states, Dreadwing, one of the few Seeker duos I remember, along with his brother Skyquake. Where's his trajectory heading? To which Wheeljack says, "To another mud ball I went to a while back to see a couple other Autobots led by Optimus, Earth. And right now, he's making sure he doesn't get away." However, this is where something else happens. Six Shot literally barrel rolls right over Cosmos and jets towards Wheeljack's ship. And this is where Hotshot simply states, "Yo, he's on your six. We need you to get out of there now." And so Wheeljack just has to swallow his pride and says, "Goodbye, baby," before he actually has to escape his own ship, right? And Cosmos catches him just in the nick of time. Pretty much, well, I guess you could say hyper speeding through and snatching up Wheeljack, with Six Shot calling him a pain in the exhaust pipe. However, this is where he notes that he is traveling with a fellow Decepticon to Earth. And Override simply states, "Sorry about your ship, Wheeljack, but hey, maybe we can build you a new one or something." To which Wheeljack's like, "The old girl was great. At least I got all my grenades though, so I'm pretty much good here. So, what do you say we take out these two Decepticons once and for all?" And Hotshot's like, "Heck yeah, been waiting for some sweet payback." And this is where they all, or pretty much have Cosmos, begin blasting at the Decepticons. And he actually does manage to down, or at least, hit Dreadwing's ship in the thrusters. Because again, keep in mind, Cosmos is essentially an aerial bot, but for more space-like travels. Essentially, he should be the fastest flyer in the Transformers mythos or cosmology in general. But again, I guess I'll leave that for maybe another video in the future. But with that being said, Dreadwing and Six Shot both do discuss where they're going. And once they realize they're both going to serve Megatron and, well, I guess you could say in Skyquake's or Dreadwing's case, to avenge his brother's death, they decide that they're going to be working together on this one. So, not only do they crash land on Earth, but a large majority of the events of Loose Cannons do unfold. So, let's talk about that real quick. So, they crash land on Earth, and they actually do begin fighting against the four Autobots. However, with Cosmos there, and Cosmos essentially being a giant, essentially, I'll probably say he's around the same size as robot mode Grimlock, who was basically like kind of hulking over Optimus and stuff like that, or at least, season 1 and 2 Optimus, if you will. So when the Autobots get there, they're a little shocked to see Cosmos, and well, they kind of get over it real quickly as they do see, Dreadwing and Six Shot. But ultimately, Dreadwing does get his vehicle form, and Six Shot pretty much tells him, "Good, now that you got it, let's hightail it out of here." And they both flee. This is where we go back to seeing the interaction with the Autobots, with Hotshot and Bumblebee actually catching up from their days as scouts together. But with Hotshot also noting that since he is, been promoted, this kind of does earn him a side punch to the arm by Bumblebee, because again, Bumblebee is still technically a scout. Unfortunately, because again, he should be a warrior. But I do believe he didn't want to be a warrior until the war was done, which is actually pretty noble in all honesty. And then we have Override and Optimus, both catching up for old time's sake. However, Optimus does take a more serious tone when Override does mention that the other Decepticon was Six Shot. And this is where Optimus does simply state that Six Shot was a part of one of Megatron's more dangerous programs, and that he wasn't able to stop it in time before Six Shot was ultimately created, but luckily he was the only one that was able to successfully bond with the Unutrium program, and unfortunately, he's as durable as a star, or at least a black hole. Another interaction we actually see is Cosmos and RC, with RC and Cosmos both reminiscing about their days on Delta Squad, and him still apologizing for, Tailgate's death and stuff like that. And when she informed about Cliffjumper's death, she's like, ooh, dang. Sorry about that as well. And she does inform him that Arachne is on Earth, and this is where Cosmos does feel a little bit more motivated and states that he always wanted to take a crack at her for the likes of Tailgate. But on the Decepticon warship, man, I know Megatron would be wanting to throw a party right now. He would be straight cheesing at the fact that not only does he have one of his most loyal and honorable Decepticons on his side, but he's got a super weapon. His loyal super weapon. Do you know how that would make somebody feel? Like Megatron would probably be jumping in the air and clicking his heels if he was, like that. But then again, he does secretly like My Little Pony, so we may not. He may actually do that in private. And another change to this episode is that Dreadwing would not go out and seek vengeance. And this is because I think Six Shot will be able to convince him that with the number of Autobots, especially Cosmos, who's basically now their heavy hitter, Dreadwing would likely just not make it out alive and make the same foolish mistakes that his brother made. While this would anger Dreadwing, he would ultimately understand what Six Shot is trying to say and that he is trying to keep him alive. So Dreadwing does stay with the Decepticons, meaning that no one goes out for vengeance. And well, this episode would honestly end off with Override, Hotshot, and Wheeljack all getting their vehicle modes and testing them out. And keep in mind, Wheeljack does stay in this timeline. Let's move on to the next episode, that being Crossfire. And this changes significantly. For starters, instead of Dreadwing bringing Breakdown, he actually brings Six Shot. And in all honesty, you could actually say it's a friendly competition between them on who gets to kill Arachnid first. And this is kind of where, this is actually a bit more calculated by Arachnid with her escape. And I'm going to say this. She does escape by the skin of her teeth. Or by the alloy of her metallic teeth, right? So she barely escapes. She's a lot more injured in this timeline, but again, she still manages to escape. Still finds the Insecticon, still betrays Starscream, and Megatron is lured out to fight. However, this is where the entire Autobot combat team pretty much goes. Wheeljack, Override, Hotshot, and Cosmos is actually waiting at the top of the cave to basically get, just in case any Decepticons try to, I guess you could say, flee. However, just as usual, when they actually see that Arachnid is there, RC once again goes out of her way to attack her. And again, instead of Optimus yelling no, at the very least, he tries to yell no, but it's completely overshadowed by Cosmos, who simply tells her not to go for it, and he ultimately does kind of trip over and, fall a little bit as he was trying to reach out and try to get RC. But unfortunately, this does expose the Autobots. But they ultimately do just jump down when Megatron is finished with the Insecticon, and they all surround him. So you got about 7 Autobots there surrounding Megatron, and Megatron is a bit taken aback by how big Cosmos is, and this is where Dreadwing and Six Shot both do appear. And seeing the opportunity and the opening, Hotshot transforms and actually goes after RC, stating he'll be right back. And Override, kind of sensing what he's doing, simply just allows him to go for it. So everything kind of does happen. The same with Dreadwing promising that they would, allow them to go. However, Megatron obviously does not keep that promise. And this is actually the funny part, because Cosmos is much faster than him. So he's able to get up in the air a lot faster and is actually able to position himself in a way they can't get out without going past him. Now, while Six Shot could definitely fight Cosmos, it'll definitely be long and dragged out, and he decides that rather than dealing with what he would describe as a pain in his exhaust port, they pretty much tunnel a hole somewhere else and pretty much just fly through a different part of the cave here, or through the well, actually, yeah, it was the cave, never mind. So back with Arachnid RC, that pretty much goes the same. RC gets tied up again. However, this is where Hotshot actually comes in and actually knocks her back and slices off one of her legs with his sword. And again, I'm going to give him, basically like an energy sword, like a lightsaber, if you will. And he just kind of cuts one of Arachnid's legs off after he just pretty much kicks her back. And this is where Starscream ultimately arrives. But again, at this point, RC has definitely been cut down. And well, she goes for Starscream. Like, there is no if, and, or buts about it. She goes for him. And Starscream does try to flee. Meanwhile, after the Decepticons are already eliminated, Override and Cosmos do catch up to the rest of, I guess you could say, the team, if you will. With her being relieved that Hotshot is okay, and actually excited that he managed to harm and take down someone like Arachnid. But Arachnid does escape like in the original, and I'll actually say it's way before Cosmos lands. But this is where they actually go find RC, pretty much having been done beating the living daylights out of Starscream. Bro has no T-Cog, meaning he has no type of defense at all. And this is where RC ultimately realizes this, and she's like, it's not even worth it at this point. To which Starscream was like, what? So you'll let me go? To which RC is like, I ain't say all that. And this is where Cosmos is like, wait, so you're just gonna capture him? And to which, this is where RC pretty much explains the events of Partners. How Starscream was the one to kill Cliffjumper, and how, well, ultimately, he did deceive the Autobots nevertheless. And this is where Override is like, geez, so if we capture him, it's a likely possibility he'll escape, even with, no T-Cog. And it's a possible that he'll just be a threat in the future. To which, like, RC is like, yeah, so what do they do? And so this is where Cosmos is like, well, I guess I'll do it. And pretty much makes his arm into a cannon and pretty much just blasts his Starscream into pieces here. So that eliminates Starscream right then and there, with Cosmos simply stating that he'll gladly take the burden for his Delta teammate. Meanwhile, this is where we actually see Arachnid actually coming and finding the Insecticon hive. And she's monologuing about this, saying that how this is her perfect chance. And before she can touch one of the pod, she feels a sharp pain in her chest and looks down to see a hole right through where her spark was. And this is where, with the last bit of her energy, she turns to see Dreadwing with his cannon smoking, stating, you didn't think you would get away from me, did you? And as she pretty much goes to collapse on the floor, Six Shot simply states, well, that sucks. I wanted to shot at her myself, but you beat me to it. But I do think this would make up for both failures, right, Megatron? And simply gestures to the Insecticon hive, who Six Shot simply unlocks. And simply Megatron would be the happiest Decepticon leader in the world. Bro has a new army, his super weapon, and one of his most loyal, heavy-hitting soldiers. Bro, it's going up for Megatron just as much as it's going up for Autobots. And then Arachnid's dead, and while he doesn't know it, Starscream is dead as well. So, Yeah, everything is working out just fine, in all honesty. And this is where, believe it or not, without Breakdown being dead here, I'm actually going to say Silas finds Starscream's body and actually confiscates it. So, just so you know, I guess that's obviously going to go into later, obviously. And so, this is where we also see Megatron at the end simply welcoming the Insecticons into the Decepticon cause. And that's where we're going to leave it off here, everyone.